You're watching Mental Health with Marcie, and I'm Marcie. In today's video, we are going to talk about why I dated men for so long, and this is, I want to say, a controversial subject, but I will just put a big disclaimer here at the beginning that this is my experience and my experience only. This is not to say this is the experience of all women or all men, non-binary people, etc. This is my experience, and not to cast generalizations or categorizations across any groups of people. That is not my intent. So let's dive into it. I think there's really two main reasons why I dated men so long, and we'll start with the first one because that makes sense. So first one, I did grow up in a relatively religious and conservative household. I wouldn't say like super religious or super strict in that way at all. But it just kind of was that unspoken vibe that you you just weren't gay. Like that wasn't acceptable. And I feel like, as society and everything has progressed over the past years, it's been a lot more accepted, of course, and slightly less stigmatized in society. But it's just that whole idea that it was kind of that unwritten rule. I went to Catholic grade school and we went to mass every Sunday. And so it wasn't like overtly in my face. Like my parents were never like overtly anti-LGBT to my face. But it's just one of those things where it's kind of like that unwritten rule and where you just have that internalized homophobia that is just like society is like, hey, put that on you. That was unnecessary, but I did it anyway. So that was probably one of the first reasons, is that it just took me a really, really long time to kind of get myself out of that internalized homophobia, and that had been kind of conditioned and programmed into me over the years. And that's, again, society, religious or not, it just, you know, it just be that way. It just be discriminatory. I'm sure I'm not like saying anything groundbreaking, but I would say that was like one of the first reasons why I just like, to me, it was like, it was just a given. Like, it was never like an option. It was never like, oh, hey, like, just wondering like who you're attracted to. Like, that was never spoken about. Like, it was just like, okay, you're gonna date men. Like, that's like hard stop. And so like to me, it was just like never an option to think about like, was I attracted to other people? Did I want to date other types of people? And so yeah. A second reason, and probably even, I don't want to say more prevalent, but just something that I've discovered more recently as I've been reflecting back on my relationships with men, is I have been on a personal growth journey, is I guess what I'll call it. I have 100% like evolved. I guess that sounds crazy, but grown as a person, from 10 years ago, which is like no surprise. Like everyone grows in their 20s, and then like in 10 years, obviously things are going to change. But for me, what was really, I guess, important for me at the time is that I sought a lot of validation from the opposite sex. And so that's something where I, in high school, was getting a lot of attention from guys, and they're, oh, you're so pretty, or what, I don't know, as high school is a long time ago. But that kind of thing where I would get that kind of external validation. And that's something that I learned to seek out and really make an integral part of my identity, that I had to have that external validation. I had to have somebody attached to me who was going to tell me I was pretty all the time. And so that, stems back to deep insecurities, and, we can make a whole hours long video about that. But the gist of it is that I ended up really relying on male partners specifically for that kind of external validation, and that like, oh, I need you to tell me that like I'm fine, like, because I don't have that level of confidence and self-worth within myself. And so over a long period of time, that's how I'm like symbolizing time has passed. Therapy, of course, has been super integral and critical in helping me really start to realize my self-worth, and that, I can have a positive, self-loving perception of myself. What did it self? I don't know. I just said a bunch of words. I don't think they made sense, but that's okay. So yeah, I can have that kind of positive reinforcement within myself, and that I can give myself that affirmation, and that I don't need it from other people. And so I won't sit here and pretend like, oh, I don't like care what people think at all, and I don't ever want anyone to like give me a compliment. Like, that's not true. But I feel like, for me at least, it's just I had a lot of that identity, and a lot of my value that I gained and my self-worth was from what other people thought of me. And so for that, that's where I always had to have that kind of relationship, or that person that I was dating, that could give me that sort of affirmation. And so as I learned over the years, to be more self-loving, and realizing my self-worth comes from other places, which again, like, I like say that so cavalierly. Cavalier? Is that a word? I don't know. I should look it up. But I say that so like nonchalantly. Like, I'm like, oh, just, realize your self-worth. Like, it ain't easy. I just tell you, like, it's like 10 years later. So I do not mean to gloss over that. And again, I do not have like any kind of perfect self-worth. Like, if you're talking about perfect, like, it ain't even in this building, room, universe. Like, that ain't me. So, but just having that kind of realization that I could actually start to value myself and not needing that external validation, that's something where it kind of came hand in hand, I guess, with my, what shall I call it, LGBT awakening of sorts. And more so, awakening is the wrong word probably, but more so acceptance of myself. And so by that, it's just, I had always had this kind of, like I said, external validation and support or whatever, that kind of like feeling good about myself from men throughout my dating relationships, as I mentioned. And so once I started getting into what I'll call like the gray area of like, maybe I'll, dip my toes in the water, dipping my toes in the water, and, just see if there's, anything out there, any women I might want to date. And it's just so, I'm sure you all, well, maybe not all of you, I'm sure some people can relate. Like, when you be on those dating apps, I'll just tell you, I mean, I'm sure everyone already knows this information, but there are significantly more men on dating apps than there are women. And then also, if you cut out all the straight women, then you got a much smaller chunk of lesbian women to go for. And so I found that while I, had made some connections and, talked to some different women, it just was a lot harder to really get that kind of like validation and that immediate kind of like, wow, like, you're great, you're amazing. And so like that validation from like being in a relationship, and that someone loves you or likes you or whatever, thinks you're hot, like, it just was a lot harder for me to find with women, which is so funny because I myself am like very picky, and I feel like that's like probably the trend across, like, not to say that men are not picky. Again, I'm not trying to make generalizations here, but just me specifically, I'm very like choosy about like who I'm looking for. And so with that, it's like, oh, I was like, oh, this is what it's like being on the other side. I was like, these other women be choosy too. And so it just was funny. Like, I was like, oh, is that what it's like? Like, because I was just used to like, you have pretty much nearly anyone you like, you get likes back and stuff. And again, this has been my experience, not to be like, oh, I'm so pretty, whatever, because this is what we got going on today. But it's just that in general, it's a lot easier to get matches and contacts from men than it was from women. And so for me, it was like, I was very impatient. I did not like to be alone. And so it took a long time for me to finally realize it's like, hey, like, you can actually be by yourself and like be patient and like find the right girl for you. And it took me a really long time to accept that. And I feel like I'm still kind of coming into that because it's really hard, even now for me to be single ever. But yeah, it's just been, a really, a really enlightening experience, I guess, when I just think about how I look back and it's like when you're in the moment, like you don't realize it, but I look back and I'm like, oh, like this is why I see probably like just for reference, if anyone has their settings on to both to see men and women, you know, and non-binary people, etc. Set up, then like you will see 99 profiles of men for every one profile of a woman. I'm not even kidding you. Like that is the ratio. It's like you won't even see any women. And so I was like so just inundated with, you know, messages or, you know, just matches and things from men. And so by having that that switch, it took me a long time. And like I said, I'm still figuring it out, but to really kind of accept like, oh, I can have my own life and identity outside of this other person, and I'm not defined by my relationship, and like that doesn't have to be my whole life. And so I'm still very much in the process of figuring out who I am, you know, what I like to do, you know. I don't really know. I like to like play with stuffies and make YouTube videos on the internet and have fun pink lights in the background. Like that's what I like to do. But it's just one of those things where I've taken a long time to kind of get to this point where I was very, you know, codependent in relationships. And so being able to be more of myself and realize I have something to bring to the table is something that I found has made me more patient. Well, I say that I'm so impatient. I'm like the most impatient person. Slightly more patient in terms of realizing, okay, well, like, let me, like, I don't need all of this attention from men. Like, let me go ahead and actually try to find a woman that I would be interested in. And of course, this is not to make more generalizations. This is just my personal experience, you know, in accepting my gayness over the years, which has been a long journey. Again, I'm like just inventing ways to tell time, display time lapses. So anyway, that's all I have today. Just wanted to give you a quick update there, and just as I've started to think about, I'm like, why did I date men for so long? Like that just seems, I'm like, why? And again, not because there's anything wrong with men in any way. It's just more like I be gay, so like, you know, but I still dated men for like most of my life. So anyway, it's again nothing, no shade to anyone of any gender expression, sexual orientation, etc. No shade to anyone. You know, you do you. Whatever feels good for you is great. But yeah, maybe I'll do some more updates sometime in the future about my whole journey, because it has been one. But I just really found it so interesting that I guess a dissection of like self-worth and realizing that I didn't need that external validation from other people. And of course, like I still like to have that, you know, in a lesbian relationship or whatnot as well. But it's just that I guess I was able to seek it out a little bit less and not make it such a critical part of my identity. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and stay well, my friends.